The story is narrated in the first person by Jean Louise Scout Finch, who looks back as an adult on the events that occurred when she was 6 to 9 years old. She lives in the small, insular town of Maycomb, Alabama, during the Great Depression of the 1930s. Maycomb is described as an old, slow, and tired town where social routines are deeply embedded and everyone seems to know everyone else's family history. Scout lives with her older brother Jeremy "Jem" Finch and their widowed father Atticus Finch, a principled lawyer in his 50s. Their mother died when Scout was 2, and Scout barely remembers her, while Jem remembers her faintly and misses her at certain moments. The Finch family is relatively well off compared to many in town, but still lives modestly due to the hardships of the Depression. They are assisted by Calpurnia, a strict but caring African-American housekeeper who functions as a disciplinary figure and a bridge between the white Finch home and Maycomb's black community. Scout introduces Maycomb's caste-like social structure. Old family names and long-standing reputations matter greatly. The Finches are considered respectable middle-upper-class whites. Below them in status are the poor but proud white farmers like the Cunninghams, and far below are the white trash Ewells, known for their lawlessness and ignorance. At the very bottom, in the eyes of white society, are the black residents who live in a separate quarter of town, go to their own churches, and are systematically oppressed. Scout also gives some family history, such as the story of her ancestor, Simon Finch, a Methodist from Cornwall, who settled in Alabama and established the family homestead, Finch's Landing. This history subtly reveals the legacy of slavery and how wealth for white families like the Finches was originally built. The children's peaceful, if idle, summers are disrupted when a boy named Charles Baker Harris, nicknamed Dill, arrives to spend time with his aunt, Miss Rachel, who lives next door. Dill is small, imaginative, talkative, and fascinated by dramatic stories and mysteries. Quickly, Scout, Jem, and Dill become inseparable companions. The trio develop a shared obsession with the Radley place, a decaying, mysterious house on their street. The Radley home has long been a source of gossip and fear among townspeople. Its shutters are always closed, and its yard is overgrown. Living there is Nathan Radley and, they are told, his younger brother Arthur Boo Radley. Boo became a local legend. As a teenager, he fell in with a rowdy group of boys, got into trouble, and, after a youthful prank involving a locked county officer in an outhouse, his stern father kept him essentially imprisoned at home, instead of sending him to the state industrial school. Over the years, Boo has never been seen publicly, and the town has come to imagine him as a lurking, monstrous figure, responsible for small misfortunes.
Dill goads Jem and Scout to approach the Radley house and try to lure Boo outside, turning Boo into a kind of summer dare. Jem, who prides himself on courage, is torn between fear and the desire to impress Dill and Scout. They act out melodramatic games about the Radleys, playing at stabbing scenes and imaginary gossip, which mixes town legend with childish invention. Atticus quietly disapproves when he discovers their game and tells them to stop tormenting Boo, reminding them that what they are doing is disrespectful to a real, living man. This is the first important moral lesson in the novel. Atticus insists that Boo has the right to privacy and dignity, no matter how strange he seems. At school, Scout finally begins first grade, full of anticipation, but quickly becomes disillusioned. Her teacher, Miss Caroline Fisher, is inexperienced, rigid, and unfamiliar with Maycomb's ways. She is upset that Scout can already read and write, telling her that Atticus must stop teaching her, as Scout is supposedly too advanced and not learning correctly. This frustrates Scout deeply, as reading with Atticus at night is one of the acts of intimacy and comfort she treasures. Miss Caroline also mishandles local poverty and pride. When she offers lunch money to Walter Cunningham, Jr., a boy from a poor farming family, she does not understand that the Cunninghams never take what they cannot repay. Scout tries to explain the Cunningham family's code of honor, but instead of appreciating the explanation, Miss Caroline punishes Scout, hitting her hand with a ruler and making her stand in the corner. Scout concludes that school is a place where her honesty and intelligence are not valued. At recess, Scout, still angry, attacks Walter Cunningham in the schoolyard, blaming her for her humiliation. Jim intervenes and stops the fight, then invites Walter to lunch with them at the Finch house. During the meal, Scout is shocked when Walter pours syrup over his meat and vegetables. She rudely criticizes his table manners, at which point Calpurnia firmly rebukes her, taking her into the kitchen and explaining that guests must be treated with respect, regardless of their habits or background. Calpurnia's strictness in this scene underscores her role as a moral educator who insists on basic human courtesy. Back at school, another revealing incident occurs with Burris Ewell, a classmate who arrives on the first day filthy, infested with lice, and defiantly rude. Miss Caroline, horrified by a cootie in his hair, tries to deal with him, but Burris responds with foul language and contempt before leaving. A classmate explains to Miss Caroline that the Ewells attend only the first day of school each year to avoid trouble with the law, which requires attendance, but they are effectively allowed to break the rules because the town has given up on enforcing them against the Ewells. That night, Scout tells Atticus she does not want to return to school. Atticus listens carefully and then teaches her another critical principle. To truly understand a person, you must climb into their skin and walk around in it. Atticus asks Scout to consider Miss Caroline's perspective as a new teacher unfamiliar with Maycomb. He refuses to let Scout simply quit school, but he offers a quiet compromise. They will continue to read together each evening, as they always have, but Scout must not tell Miss Caroline. This secret pact comforts Scout and models Atticus's method of resolving conflicts through empathy and reason rather than rebellion or bitterness. It also establishes the novel's central ethical theme, the necessity of empathy and moral imagination in an unjust and often cruel society.
As Scout continues first grade, she finds school slow and unsatisfying compared to the rich learning she gets at home with Atticus. The highlight of her days becomes walking home with Jem. One afternoon, she notices something shiny in the knothole of an oak tree on the Radley property line. Investigating, she finds 2 sticks of Wrigley's Double Mint gum wrapped in foil. She chews the gum, to Jem's horror, because he fears it could be poisoned or dangerous coming from the Radley place. After some hesitation and checking with Atticus, they conclude it is harmless, but they remain puzzled about its origin. Shortly afterward, they discover 2 Indian head pennies in the same knothole, clearly placed there deliberately. These small treasures suggest that someone, mysterious, watchful, and kind, is leaving them gifts. The children, still steeped in superstition about the Radleys, are perplexed and excited, but do not yet draw the obvious conclusion. Summer arrives again, and Dill returns to Maycomb. The 3 resume their fascination with Boo Radley, refining their earlier Radley plays into more detailed reenactments of town gossip. Jem insists they are simply playing, but their dramatizations closely echo the known history of Boo's youthful trouble and supposed violence. One day, while they are acting out one of these scenes in the front yard, Atticus unexpectedly comes home and observes them. He calmly but firmly tells them to stop their games about the Radleys, stating that what they are doing is unkind, and that if they want to know about Boo, they should knock on his door and ask him themselves, rather than making someone's life into entertainment. Atticus reminds them that the Radleys have the right to be left alone. This rebuke embarrasses the children and introduces another important layer to Atticus's moral code, the idea that curiosity must be balanced by respect for others' privacy and dignity. Despite Atticus's warning, Dill and Jem's curiosity about Boo intensifies rather than fades. One evening, they attempt a more daring stunt.
Dill proposes that Jem run up and touch the Radley house. In a mixture of bravado and fear, Jem accepts the challenge. The children approach the house cautiously, their hearts racing. Jem dashes up, slaps the side of the house, and then sprints back. As they flee, they think they see a shutter move slightly, and in their panic, they convince themselves Boo is watching them. This event deepens Boo's ghostly presence in their minds, transforming him from a rumor into an almost physical, looming reality. Yet beneath the fear, there is a growing sense that Boo is not a simple monster, but a figure of mystery and perhaps misunderstood humanity.
In the fall, Scout's relationships begin to change. Jem and Dill grow closer in their shared fantasies and plans, often excluding Scout or treating her as too young. Feeling left out, Scout spends more time with their neighbor, Miss Maudie Atkinson, a sharp-witted, kind, and independent woman who loves her garden and respects Atticus. Miss Maudie becomes a crucial adult ally for Scout. She provides honest answers about Maycomb, religion, and especially Boo Radley. Unlike the gossiping townspeople, Miss Maudie insists that Arthur Boo Radley was a polite, gentle boy who suffered under his father's harsh, foot-washing Baptist interpretation of religion, a narrow, joyless form of faith that sees pleasure and most normal human activities as sinful. She rejects the monstrous rumors about Boo and implies that he is more a victim than a villain. Through Miss Maudie, Scout starts to see Boo as a real person who has been deeply hurt by a rigid and unforgiving family environment. Jem and Dill, however, are not ready to abandon their fascination with Boo. One night, they convince Scout to join them in a risky expedition to peer into the Radley house. They slip through the back fence and creep around the property, attempting to look in a window. Suddenly they see a shadow, a tall figure, pass by them silently. Terrified, they flee. As they run, a shotgun blast rings out from the Radley house. In their panic, Jem's pants snag on a fence, and he must kick them off to escape. The children manage to rejoin the knot of curious neighbors gathering on the street, who have heard Nathan Radley's claim that he fired at a Negro in his collard patch. When Atticus notices Jem's missing pants, hastily Dill lies that Jem lost them in a game of strip poker, a scandalous claim that shocks the adults until it is clarified that they used only matches, not cards. That night, Jem is tormented by guilt and fear. He decides he must retrieve his pants secretly to prevent Atticus from discovering the truth. Jem sneaks back to the Radley fence alone. When he returns, shaken but safe, he reveals something extraordinary to Scout. His pants were not tangled in the fence as he left them. Instead, they had been folded neatly over the wire, sewn crudely, as if someone knew he would return for them and tried to help him. This detail deeply disturbs Jem. The rational explanation that Arthur Boo Radley had seen his predicament, rescued the pants, mended them, and left them as a quiet kindness, forces Jem to rethink his view of Boo. The figure he had treated as a source of horror now appears to be watchful and protective. Jem does not fully share his emotional response with Scout, but he grows more thoughtful and subdued. His innocence about the world's simplicity begins to erode. Over the following weeks, more objects appear in the knothole of the Radley oak tree: a ball of gray twine, 2 carved soap figurines that clearly resembled Jem and Scout, a spelling medal, an old pocket watch with a chain, and eventually a good luck penny. The soap figurines are especially significant. They prove that whoever is leaving the gifts knows the children closely, studying their features and habits with tender attention. Jem and Scout suspect strongly that Boo Radley is their benefactor. They decide to write him a thank-you note, expressing appreciation for the gifts and asking some timid questions. They plan to leave the note in the knothole. However, when they go to the tree, they discover the knothole has been filled with cement.
Jem questions Nathan Radley about it, and Nathan claims he filled it because the tree is dying. Later, when Jem consults Atticus, Atticus says the tree looks healthy. He does not entirely grasp what has happened, but Jem does. Nathan has deliberately cut off Boo's communication with the outside world and with the children. That night, Jem stands on the porch and silently cries. The sealing of the knothole is not just the end of a mysterious game, it is the conscious shutting down of Boo's gentle outreach, a quiet act of cruelty that denies him his one small channel of connection and kindness. Winter arrives, and with it comes unusual weather for Maycomb, snow. Scout has never seen snow before and believes the world is ending. School is closed. Jem and Scout gather the little snow that has fallen, supplementing it with dirt, and build a strange, lumpy snowman that initially resembles their overweight neighbor, Mr. Avery, who had recently scolded them, blaming children's misbehavior for the change in the seasons. The caricature is so accurate and mocking that Atticus insists they alter it to look less like Mr. Avery. They disguise it slightly, but the episode shows Jem's and Scout's increasing creativity and their willingness to satirize adult authority figures, even as Atticus tries to teach them restraint and respect. That night, a deeper crisis hits Maycomb. In the freezing weather, Miss Maudie's house catches fire. Atticus wakes the children in the middle of the night, hustling them outside to stand by the Radley place, while neighbors and firefighters struggle to control the blaze. The entire neighborhood works together, dragging Miss Maudie's furniture out and watching helplessly as her beloved house burns nearly to the ground. In the chaos and cold, Scout becomes absorbed in the spectacle of flames and smoke, hardly aware of her own discomfort. Only later, when they return home, does Atticus point out that someone has draped a blanket over her shoulders while she was watching the fire. Neither she nor Jem noticed anyone approach. Atticus suggests quietly that Boo Radley was the one who slipped up behind her to place the blanket around her, protecting her from the bitter cold. Jem, his conscience heavy from their earlier attempts to invade Boo's privacy, suddenly confesses everything to Atticus. Their games, their attempts to lure Boo out, their nighttime raid on the Radley house, and the incident with the mended pants. Atticus listens and simply tells them to stop tormenting Boo and to leave him alone. Scout is stunned by the thought that Boo was that close to her and that she failed to notice, but the gesture of the blanket, along with the earlier gifts, gradually transforms Boo in her mind from a terrifying phantom into a shy, benevolent neighbor who communicates in the only ways he knows, silent acts of protection and generosity.
The next day, Miss Maudie, remarkably cheerful despite her loss, tells Scout that she had always wanted a smaller house and more room for her garden. She refuses to indulge in self-pity and focuses instead on the positive. Her resilience and refusal to complain impress Scout and model another form of moral strength, facing misfortune with humor and courage. Meanwhile, the children's growing awareness of Boo Radley's quiet kindness is mirrored by larger changes taking place in Maycomb, changes that will draw them inexorably into the harsh realities of racism, injustice, and moral conflict. The small mysteries of childhood, like the gifts in the tree and the blanket around Scout's shoulders, prepare them in subtle ways for the larger moral lessons that will soon arise when Atticus takes on the most controversial case of his career, the defense of Tom Robinson, a black man falsely accused of raping a white woman. The next major phase of Scout's childhood begins when Atticus quietly accepts the court-appointed task of defending Tom Robinson, a black field hand accused of raping Mayella Ewell, a white woman. At first, Scout does not understand the gravity of this decision. She only notices that her father seems busier and more preoccupied. The town of Maycomb, however, reacts strongly. In a society built on rigid racial hierarchies, a white lawyer mounting a serious defense of a black man against a white accuser is seen as an act of betrayal. Gossip spreads, and insults begin to reach Scout and Jem through their schoolmates and neighbors. The children's previous world, centered on games and mysteries, starts to collide with the brutal facts of Southern racism. Scout's first direct encounter with this hostility occurs at school when Cecil Jacobs, a classmate, announces loudly that Scout Finch's daddy defends niggers. Scout does not fully grasp what Atticus's case involves, but she understands that her father is being insulted. Her instinct, shaped by previous playground disputes, is to fight physically. She nearly attacks Cecil, but remembers Atticus's earlier request that she try to avoid fighting and instead use her head. That evening, she demands an explanation from Atticus. He sits her down and explains that he is defending Tom Robinson because it is the morally right thing to do. Atticus tells her that if he did not do his best to help Tom, he could not hold his head up in town, represent Maycomb in the legislature, or even tell Scout and Jem not to do wrong. He insists that conscience is not determined by majority opinion. Sometimes you are licked before you begin, but you must fight for justice anyway. This conversation establishes the central moral conflict of the novel, the clash between personal integrity and the deep-seated injustices of society.
As Christmas approaches, Atticus's brother, Uncle Jack Finch, visits Maycomb. He is jovial, childlike in some ways, and adored by Scout and Jem. The Finch family travels to Finch's Landing, the old family homestead, to spend Christmas with their relatives, including their cold, aristocratic Aunt Alexandra and her grandson Francis. Aunt Alexandra embodies the old Southern emphasis on fine folks, bloodlines, and rigid gender roles. She disapproves of Scout's overalls and tomboy behavior, insisting that Scout should behave like a lady and spend more time with girls instead of with Jem and Dill. Scout resents these expectations, feeling misunderstood and hemmed in. During the visit, Scout's simmering frustration boils over when Francis repeats adult gossip he has heard, calling Atticus a nigger lover and saying he's ruining the family. Not understanding the full meaning of the slur, but sensing the hatred behind it, Scout attacks Francis. They are separated, and Scout ends up punished by Uncle Jack, who does not initially listen to her side of the story. Back in Maycomb, Scout angrily explains everything to Uncle Jack, including Francis's provocation. Jack realizes his mistake. He had acted without seeking the full truth. He apologizes to Scout, and she forgives him. Later, Jack talks with Atticus, not realizing Scout is listening from the stairs. Atticus deliberately speaks loudly enough for Scout to hear, discussing child-rearing and the trial. He explains that the Tom Robinson case will be extremely hard on Scout and Jem, as they will hear ugly talk and feel pressure from all sides. Atticus expresses the hope that he can get through the trial without losing his children's trust or making them bitter. He asks Jack to remember that when children ask honest questions, adults should answer them directly, not evade or lie. Scout, overhearing this, feels both reassured and sobered, recognizing that Atticus is quietly preparing for a difficult moral storm. As the trial approaches, outward tensions in Maycomb increase. Scout continues to face insults from neighbors and classmates. One afternoon, she hears Mrs. Henry Lafayette Dubose, an elderly, viciously sharp-tongued neighbor, hurl abuse at Atticus from her porch. Mrs. Dubose, frail but terrifying in her prejudices, calls Atticus no better than the trash he works for, and predicts that he will regret defending Tom Robinson. Atticus, who passes her house daily, remains unfailingly polite,
greeting her respectfully and advising Scout and Jem to hold their heads high and be gentlemen and ladies, regardless of what is said. He insists that real courage is not physical toughness or retaliation, but the ability to endure insults and injustice without surrendering one's principles. Scout struggles to embody this ideal, often biting back her instinct to fight physically, but her understanding of moral courage is slowly expanding.
Meanwhile, the children realize that Atticus, whom they have long considered old and unathletic compared to other fathers, possesses unexpected strengths. The revelation comes when a rabid dog, Tim Johnson, appears in the street, staggering and dangerous. The town sheriff, Heck Tate, arrives but insists that Atticus shoot the dog, stating that his own aim is too uncertain. Jem and Scout are stunned. They have never seen Atticus handle a gun and know him as a man of books and quiet words. Reluctantly, Atticus takes the rifle, steadies himself, and in one clean shot kills the dog. Miss Maudie later explains to the children that Atticus was once known as One-Shot Finch, the best marksman in the county. He simply chose not to use or boast about this ability. He disliked the power of a gun and believed that his talents should not be used to intimidate or harm unnecessarily. This incident reshapes Jem's and Scout's view of their father. They come to see that true courage and strength are often hidden, and that humility about one's power is part of integrity. Following a particularly cruel insult from Mrs. Dubose about Atticus and the children, Jem loses his temper. In a fit of rage, he destroys her beloved camellia bushes, hacking at them until they are mangled. When Atticus learns what has happened, he insists that Jem must face the consequences. As punishment, Jem must read aloud to Mrs. Dubose every afternoon after school and on Saturdays for a month. Scout, though not required, often accompanies him. The visits are deeply unpleasant. Mrs. Dubose insults them, mocks Atticus, and appears to be in constant physical distress. As the weeks pass, Jem notices that each reading session lasts a little longer before Mrs. Dubose's fits begin, and he realizes they have exceeded the original one-month term. Finally, the sessions end. Shortly afterward, Mrs. Dubose dies. Atticus then reveals the truth about Mrs. Dubose. She was a morphine addict. Knowing she was dying, she was determined to free herself from the drug before her death, even though this meant enduring terrible pain and torment. The children's reading distracted her and helped her push the intervals between doses longer and longer. Atticus explains that in his view, Mrs. Dubose was the bravest person he ever knew because she fought a painful losing battle simply to preserve her own autonomy and die beholden to nothing and no one. He wanted Jem to see that true courage and strength are not a man with a gun, but a frail, unpleasant woman struggling against her own weakness to do what she thinks is right. Jem receives a final token from her, a single perfect camellia, symbolizing both her harshness and the stern purity of her resolve. The episode deepens Jem's understanding of moral complexity. A person can be hateful and racist, yet still possess a form of courage.
As the trial date nears, another shift occurs in Maycomb. Atticus, needing extra income, must spend part of his time at the state legislature. During one extended absence, Calpurnia takes Jem and Scout to her African-American church, First Purchase African M.E. Church. Scout and Jem are curious and a bit apprehensive. They have never been in a black church before. When they arrive, they experience a momentary hostility from a woman named Lula, who questions why Calpurnia is bringing white children into a black place of worship. Lula's anger reflects the simmering resentment about racial inequality and the suspicion that white people only cross the color line when it suits them. However, the rest of the congregation welcomes Scout and Jem warmly, and Calpurnia's position in both communities becomes clear.
She is respected, dignified, and able to navigate the rigid racial boundaries with caution and intelligence. Inside the church, Scout notices differences from her own white church. There are no hymn books, most members cannot read. Instead, a leader lines the hymns, speaking or singing a line, which the congregation repeats. The service emphasizes communal support, especially for Tom Robinson's family. The collection that day is devoted to helping Tom's wife, Helen, who has struggled to find work because of the stigma surrounding Tom's accusation. The minister insists they will not end the collection until they have raised enough money. Scout, for the first time, sees Black worship and community life up close, realizing both the depth of hardship they face and the strength of their solidarity. After the service, she and Jem question Calpurnia about her ability to speak in two different voices, one at the Finch house and another at church. Calpurnia explains that she adjusts her speech based on her context to avoid seeming superior or strange to her peers. This conversation teaches Scout about code switching, class awareness, and the social survival skills required in a racially divided society. When they return home, they find Aunt Alexandra waiting on the porch. She has come to stay with the Finches for an extended period, believing the children need a feminine influence and more rigorous training in family heritage and propriety. Her arrival marks the beginning of another domestic conflict, the clash between Atticus's quiet, egalitarian values and Alexandra's insistence on social class, family pride, and traditional gender roles. With Tom Robinson's trial drawing near, the Finch household becomes the center of both private and public tensions, and Scout and Jem are increasingly pulled from the innocence of childhood into the complicated, often harsh, adult world of law, race, and morality. Aunt Alexandra settles into the Finch household, determined to reshape it according to her standards of Southern gentility. She quickly joins Maycomb's social circle, hosting missionary teas and integrating herself with the town's leading ladies. Alexandra is preoccupied with heredity and fine folks, the belief that long-established families inherit certain moral qualities and that the Finch family, as one of Maycomb County's oldest, must uphold a certain dignity. She pressures Atticus to impress upon Scout and Jem their aristocratic ancestry, reciting family stories and emphasizing that they are not from run-of-the-mill people. Scout finds these lectures confusing and burdensome. The abstract notion of family pride means little to a girl who judges people by personal behavior rather than bloodlines. The tension between Atticus's individual-based morality and Alexandra's class-based values surfaces in a painful scene. At Alexandra's urging, Atticus awkwardly calls Scout and Jem into the living room and tries to lecture them on the importance of the Finch name and what is expected of them. He uses phrases that clearly are not his own, sounding stiff and artificial. Scout, sensing the falseness, begins to cry. Finally, Atticus gives up the performance, rubs his face, and tells them to forget what he said. This failed attempt underscores that even when he yields to social pressure, Atticus cannot convincingly betray his own principles. Scout is reassured that her father remains essentially himself, though Alexandra continues to exert pressure in subtler ways, as when she insists that Calpurnia is no longer needed and should be dismissed. Atticus firmly refuses, stating that Calpurnia is a faithful member of the family. This quiet assertion of loyalty to Calpurnia stands as an act of resistance to Alexandra's class and racial prejudices. As the summer deepens, excitement and tension surrounding Tom Robinson's upcoming trial intensify in Maycomb. The case becomes a public spectacle. Gossip circulates freely, and some residents travel from the countryside planning to attend the trial as they would a fair or entertainment. Scout and Jem sense the growing hostility, though Atticus tries to shield them from the worst of it. One evening, a group of local men, including Sheriff Heck Tate and several townsfolk, gather at the Finch house to discuss the case with Atticus. Scout and Jem, curious, sneak out to listen. Although they do not fully understand the conversation, they catch that Tom Robinson is being held in the Maycomb jail and that there may be trouble if he is left there unprotected. Some men are worried that a lynch mob might form, given the volatile emotions surrounding a black man accused of raping a white woman. Atticus's quiet, firm responses suggest he is determined to face whatever may come.
The threat soon becomes real. On the night before the trial is to begin, Atticus takes his car and leaves the house unusually late. Jem, uneasy, guesses where he is gone. He, Scout, and Dill sneak out and follow him to the town square. They find Atticus sitting alone in a chair outside the jailhouse door, reading under the light, with a nearby light bulb illuminating his solitary figure. His car is parked out of sight, emphasizing that he intends to stay and guard Tom Robinson personally. The jail itself has only a single black man inside, but Atticus's presence transforms it into a symbolic stand for law and due process against mob violence. After a while, a group of cars arrives. Several men emerge, strangers to Scout, but clearly purposeful. They confront Atticus, ordering him to move aside so they can get to Tom. The atmosphere turns menacing. Atticus refuses calmly, arguing with them about the law and Tom's safety, but he is outnumbered and it is clear the men are prepared to use force. Jem, sensing the danger, refuses Scout's whispered suggestion that they leave. Suddenly, Scout, not grasping how precarious the situation is, runs into the circle of men, calling out, "Hey, Atticus!" The mob is startled to see children. Scout, trying to be friendly as she would on the street, looks for a familiar face and recognizes Mr. Walter Cunningham, the father of her classmate. Not understanding that he is part of the mob, she begins talking to him about his entailment, a legal matter Atticus once did for him, and about his son Walter. She chatters nervously, mentioning how she invited Walter home once and how they are classmates. At first, Cunningham does not respond, embarrassed and trapped between the mob mentality and the child addressing him as an individual. Scout's innocent persistence, her insistence on seeing him not as part of a hostile group, but as Mr. Cunningham, a man with a son and a farm, gradually breaks the spell of anonymity. Finally, he bends down, tells Scout he will tell his son hello, and then straightens up and instructs the men to leave. The mob disperses. Scout does not fully understand what has happened, but Atticus does. Later, he explains that a mob is always made up of people, and sometimes all it takes is one person to remind them of their individual humanity to dissolve its power. Scout's naive yet direct appeal to Cunningham's sense of personal identity and obligation saved Tom's life that night. Next, Bob Ewell takes the stand. He is rude, cocky, and clearly enjoys the public attention. He testifies that he heard Mayella screaming, ran to the window, saw Tom Robinson raping her, and that Tom ran away when he arrived. His language is crude, and he addresses the court with an air of self-righteousness. Under Atticus's cross-examination, his confidence begins to crack. Atticus asks Bob to sign his name on a piece of paper. Bob does so with his left hand, revealing that he is left-handed. This is crucial because Mayella's right side was bruised, indicating a left-handed attacker facing her. Tom Robinson's left arm, as everyone will soon see, is useless due to a childhood accident. Without accusing Bob directly at this stage, Atticus allows the jury and the attentive reader to deduce that Bob himself is physically far more likely than Tom to have inflicted Mayella's injuries. Ewell grows increasingly hostile as Atticus calmly exposes weaknesses and contradictions in his story, revealing him as both ignorant and possibly violent. The courtroom scene, as observed by Scout and Jem, becomes a vivid lesson in how racism, class, and personal spite intersect to produce a false accusation. The day's testimony thus far reveals much more than the basic allegation of rape. It exposes the deeply compromised character of Bob Ewell, the lack of proper investigation, and the physical implausibility of Tom as the assailant, given his disability. Nevertheless, the unspoken but powerful assumption remains: a white woman's accusation against a black man carries enormous weight in Maycomb society. As the first day of testimony closes, Scout and Jem are drawn further into the adult world of evidence, bias, and moral complexity, witnessing their father calmly resist a deeply unjust system using only words and reason. After Sheriff Tate and Bob Ewell testify, the prosecution calls Mayella Ewell, the alleged victim. She is a lonely, nervous young woman around 19, dressed in an awkward attempt at cleanliness and formality that contrasts with her family's usual squalor. On the stand, she is visibly terrified, not only of the courtroom, but especially of Atticus. She reads his respectful "Miss Mayella, ma'am" and "Miss Mayella" as mockery, because no one has ever treated her with such formal courtesy. She assumes he is making fun of her. Her confusion and defensiveness reveal her background. She is a white woman, but the poorest of the poor, trapped in a household dominated by her crude, abusive father.
Under questioning by the prosecutor, Mr. Gilmer, Mayella testifies that she invited Tom Robinson onto the property to chop up an old chifforobe, a wardrobe, then claims that he suddenly attacked and raped her. She refuses to answer certain questions directly, but she tells a story in which Tom is the aggressor and she the helpless victim. When Atticus begins his cross-examination, he moves slowly and gently, asking about her life. Through his questions, he brings out the bleak reality of Mayella's situation. She is the eldest daughter of a large brood of children, effectively acting as their mother. Her father is often drunk and likely abusive. The family lives behind the town dump in a shack, and Mayella has no friends or companions. She has saved nickels for a year so the younger children could go to town for ice cream one afternoon, leaving her alone. These details show her isolation and desperation for human contact. When Atticus asks Mayella to describe the events of the alleged rape, he presses her to clarify Tom's exact actions. Crucially, he points out that no doctor was called, even though Mayella claims she was badly beaten and raped. He also focuses on the fact that the bruises were predominantly on the right side of her face. The logic he is building, which the jury can see, is that a left-handed person facing her likely caused that pattern of injury, and Bob Ewell is left-handed, while Tom's left arm is crippled. Atticus suggests, subtly but unmistakably, that Mayella is lying and that it was her father who beat her. When Atticus asks her directly whether it was her father, not Tom, who attacked her, Mayella becomes hysterical. She refuses to answer, bursts into tears, and finally, in a burst of rage, shouts at the courtroom. She accuses everyone there of being cowards if they do not convict Tom, and insists on her version of events. Her outburst reveals both fear and resentment. She is trapped between the reality of her father's violence and the town's racial code, which gives her, as a white woman, enormous power over a black man's fate. Tom Robinson then takes the stand in his own defense. For the first time, Scout and Jem hear his voice at length and see him as a full person. Tom is polite, soft-spoken, and honest. He explains that his left arm was injured in a childhood accident with a cotton gin, leaving it essentially useless. This physical fact makes it nearly impossible for him to have inflicted the pattern of injuries described. Tom testifies that he often passed the Ewell place on his way to and from work, and that Mayella would sometimes ask him to help with small chores, chopping wood, fixing doors, carrying water. He did these tasks without pay, saying he felt sorry for her because she had no one to help her and seemed lonely. This statement, that a black man could feel sorry for a white woman, is deeply offensive to the racial hierarchy of Maycomb, where white people are assumed to be superior.
Under Atticus's questions, Tom recounts the day in question. He says Mayella asked him inside to fix a door that was not actually broken. Once inside, she sent her younger siblings out for ice cream, and then, when they were alone, grabbed him around the legs and then around the waist, kissing him and saying she had never kissed a grown man before and that what her father did to her didn't count. Tom says he was shocked and tried to pull away, insisting she let him go. At that moment, Bob Ewell appeared at the window, saw them, and shouted something like, "You goddamn whore, I'll kill you." Tom says he ran away, scared of what would happen to him as a black man caught in a compromising situation with a white woman. His story explains Mayella's bruises, from the beating her father likely gave her for shaming him, and her motivation to cover up her own forbidden desire and protect herself from her father's wrath by shifting blame onto Tom. The prosecutor, Mr. Gilmer, cross-examines Tom harshly, focusing less on facts than on racial assumptions. Gilmer asks why Tom would help Mayella without being paid. When Tom says again that he felt sorry for her, the courtroom reacts negatively. To white Maycomb, the idea that a black man could pity a white woman implies an unacceptable equality, even superiority of moral standing. Gilmer repeatedly addresses Tom as boy, dripping disdain. His tone deeply offends Dill, who bursts into tears and must leave the courtroom. Outside, Dill tells Scout that it was the way Mr. Gilmer spoke to Tom, sneering, condescending, that made him sick. Scout, accustomed to the town's racism, initially shrugs it off as the normal way people talk to black people, but Dill's visceral reaction and later Dolphus Raymond's explanation that children cry when they see injustice because they have not yet become numb to it help Scout perceive the cruelty behind the courtroom's standard demeanor toward Tom. Dolphus Raymond, a white man who lives with a black woman and has mixed-race children, speaks to Scout and Dill outside the courthouse. Known in town as a drunkard who drinks from a paper sack, he pretends to be drunk so the white community can attribute his unconventional lifestyle to alcoholism rather than confronting their own prejudice. He tells Scout that when she grows older, she will no longer cry over injustice because it will become normal and expected to her, but that it is good that children see injustice as wrong. His cynical yet compassionate outlook highlights another theme. Many people in Maycomb know the system is unjust, but accept or accommodate it instead of actively resisting.
Back in the courtroom, Atticus delivers his closing argument, the moral centerpiece of the novel. He first reviews the evidence logically. There is no medical proof of rape. The testimony of Bob and Mayella Ewell is inconsistent. Mayella's injuries fit an attack from a left-handed man, and Tom's left arm is useless. He then asserts that the only crime Mayella committed was breaking a rigid, unwritten social code by attempting to seduce a black man. When her father discovered her, she had to destroy the evidence of her offense by accusing Tom, knowing the town's racial prejudice would support her lie. Atticus does not condemn Mayella entirely. He calls her the victim of cruel poverty and ignorance, and suggests she must live in a world without love or respect. However, he says she has put a man's life at stake to cover her own guilt, and that is inexcusable. Atticus then turns to the jury and addresses the broader issue of racism. He insists that the court is supposed to be the one place where all men are created equal. He acknowledges that in everyday life, people are not equal. Some are smarter, some have more money, some are born into better families. But within a courtroom, the law must be blind to race and class. He warns the jury against the evil assumption that all black men lie, are immoral, or cannot be trusted around white women. His voice grows more impassioned as he urges them to do their duty without prejudice and to find Tom Robinson not guilty.
At the end, he quietly says, "In the name of God, do your duty." Then, exhausted, he returns to his table and surprisingly leaves the courtroom, not staying for the jury's decision. The jury deliberates for a long time, longer than is typical for a case of a black man accused by a white woman in Maycomb. Scout, Jem, and Dill wait anxiously in the balcony with the black community. Jem is filled with optimism, convinced that the evidence is so clearly in Tom's favor that the jury cannot possibly convict him. Scout is less certain, still observing more than interpreting. When the jury finally returns, the courtroom is utterly silent. Scout watches their faces, remembering Atticus's earlier lesson that a jury never looks at a defendant it has convicted. She notes that none of the jurors look at Tom. The verdict is delivered. Guilty, 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 repeated for each count. Each repetition is a blow to Jem, who has believed in the fairness of the legal system. He is devastated, feeling that something fundamental and sacred has been shattered. Scout is shocked, but also dimly aware that this is the outcome most of the town has always expected, regardless of evidence.
After the verdict, Atticus gathers his papers slowly, buttons his vest, and walks out of the courtroom under the balcony. In a powerful moment of silent recognition and respect, all the black spectators in the balcony stand as he passes, even though he has technically lost the case. Reverend Sykes prompts Scout, "Miss Jean Louise, stand up, your father's passin'." Scout rises, understanding that the black community honors Atticus for his courage in giving Tom the strongest defense he could in a system stacked against him. Though the verdict is unjust, his effort has not gone unnoticed. That night, Jem is inconsolable. He cries, unable to accept that the jury ignored the clear evidence of Tom's innocence. He keeps asking how they could do that, and how 12 men could send an innocent man to prison simply because of his race. Atticus, weary but calm, explains that such things have been happening for a long time, and that he had hoped to keep the children from seeing them up close for a few more years. He says he's more disappointed in the system than surprised, but he notes a small sign of progress. The jury deliberated for hours instead of immediately convicting Tom, which suggests that at least one juror, later identified as a Cunningham, argued for an acquittal. This faint glimmer of resistance to prejudice is little comfort to Jem, who has lost a large portion of his childhood faith in human fairness. The next morning, Atticus finds that the black community has covered his kitchen table with food, chickens, jars of preserves, and other offerings. It is their way of thanking him for standing up for Tom when no one else would. Atticus is moved almost to tears, telling Calpurnia that they must never let this happen again, because times are hard, and the people who brought the food can hardly afford it. Meanwhile, the white community responds very differently. Some, like Miss Maudie, quietly support Atticus and recognize his moral courage. She later tells Jem and Scout that Atticus was specially chosen by Judge Taylor because he would truly try to save Tom rather than simply go through the motions. She believes that his efforts, even in defeat, pushed the town a small step forward. Others, however, like the Ewells and many of the townsfolk, feel humiliated that Atticus made them confront their own injustice in open court. This humiliation will have dangerous consequences, particularly from Bob Ewell, who feels personally exposed and insulted by Atticus's cross-examination and the implication that he, not Tom, beat Mayella. The trial's outcome marks a turning point for Jem and Scout. Jem, in particular, moves abruptly toward adulthood, wrestling with the knowledge that legal institutions and community values can be deeply corrupt. Scout, though younger and somewhat more insulated, also begins to see that the world is not governed by simple fairness. Atticus, having fought as hard as he could, knowing he was likely licked before he began, prepares to face the aftermath. an embittered, humiliated accuser in Bob Ewell, a black community further marginalized by yet another injustice, and children whose innocence has been permanently altered by what they have witnessed.
In the days following the trial, the emotional shock reverberates through the Finch family in Maycomb. Jem, deeply disillusioned, struggles to reconcile the verdict with the evidence. He lies awake at night, restless and angry, asking how people can call themselves Christian and yet send an innocent man to prison. Scout, somewhat more sheltered by her age, looks to Atticus and Jem for guidance as she tries to understand why the truth did not matter in court. Atticus reminds them that injustice is a long-standing part of their world, and that change, if it comes at all, comes slowly. He also points out that the jury deliberated for hours instead of convicting Tom immediately, a slight but real sign that at least one juror, a Cunningham as he later reveals, tried to resist the racial code of the town. Jem, however, finds little comfort in this faint progress. Bob Ewell, humiliated by Atticus's cross-examination and the implication that he beat Mayella, reacts with fury. He feels that, although he technically won the case, Atticus destroyed what little public reputation he had. Shortly after the trial, he confronts Atticus on the street, curses him, spits in his face, and threatens revenge. Atticus reacts with a composure that astonishes Jem and Scout. He calmly wipes his face, tells Bob he wishes he would not chew tobacco, and walks away. When the children ask why he did not fight back, Atticus explains that if his taking Bob's spittle and insults keeps Mayella and the Ewell children from suffering additional violence from Bob, then it is worth it. He views Bob as a man who must have his way with someone weaker. If Atticus himself can serve as that target, he prefers that to Bob turning his rage on his family. This response demonstrates Atticus's consistent refusal to respond to hatred with hatred and his willingness to absorb humiliation to protect others. Despite Atticus's outward calm, the incident worries the children, particularly Jem, who now sees Bob Ewell as truly dangerous rather than merely unpleasant. Other worrying signs appear. Bob Ewell gets a job with the WPA, a New Deal work program, but soon loses it due to laziness and blames Atticus for supposedly sabotaging him. He harasses Helen Robinson, Tom's widow, following her and shouting insults when she walks to work. Link Dees, Tom's former employer, intervenes forcefully, threatening to have Bob arrested if he continues. Dees's stand is one of the few open acts of white support for the Robinson family. Still, the pattern is clear. Bob Ewell is simmering with resentment, seeking targets for revenge. In the Finch household, Aunt Alexandra continues to press her agenda of gentility and family pride, while Atticus continues trying to raise Jem and Scout on principles of empathy and justice. One evening, Scout asks why people like the Cunninghams, who seemed to be on the right side at the jailhouse and had a juror trying to acquit Tom, can still be part of the racist system. Jem, whose thinking has grown more analytical, attempts to classify people into groups by background and behavior. Scout counter-argues that people are just folks and that things would be simpler if everyone remembered that. This child's formulation, though simple, aligns with Atticus's insistence on judging individuals rather than categories. Jem, however, feels that the world's complexities defy such neat moral optimism. As summer ends, Tom Robinson's fate worsens. He has been sent to the state prison at Enfield. Atticus continues to pursue an appeal, believing there is a chance, however slim, to have the conviction overturned. But the legal process moves slowly. One day, Atticus and Calpurnia abruptly drive out to Helen Robinson's place. That evening, they return with grim news. They tell Aunt Alexandra, Miss Maudie, and the children that Tom was shot and killed by prison guards that afternoon. Supposedly, during exercise period, Tom tried to escape by climbing the fence. The guards ordered him to stop, then fired, hitting him 17 times. Atticus describes it as the senselessness of a man's trying to escape, but the sheer number of gunshots suggests that the guard's response was excessive, steeped in fear and dehumanizing assumptions about black men. In Tom's death, the abstract injustice of the verdict becomes a final, irrevocable reality.
Atticus asks Calpurnia to accompany him to break the news to Helen, recognizing that Calpurnia's presence and shared community with Helen will help cushion the blow. When they arrive, Helen collapses wordlessly before he can finish speaking. Scout later learns how Helen bore up outwardly but was hollowed by grief. Jem reacts to Tom's death with renewed bitterness. He tells Scout that it is like killing a mockingbird, a key metaphor Miss Maudie and Atticus had earlier explained. Mockingbirds do nothing but make music and harm no one, so killing them is a sin. Tom, innocent and harmless, who tried only to help Mayella and provide for his family, has been destroyed by the cruel machinery of prejudice and fear. Around this time, Aunt Alexandra hosts a missionary tea at the Finch house, a gathering of Maycomb's leading white churchwomen. The tea provides a sharp contrast between the town's professed Christianity and its real moral failures. The women, including Mrs. Grace Merriweather, discuss missionary work in Africa and express concern for the oppressed Mruna tribe. They speak of bringing Christian civilization and comfort to distant black populations, while in the same breath complaining about sulky, ungrateful black servants at home who are upset over Tom Robinson's trial and death. Mrs. Merriweather, in particular, criticizes the black community's unrest and indirectly chastises Atticus, calling him a good but misguided man whose actions stirred up trouble by defending Tom. The hypocrisy is stark. They can pity and patronize Africans as a distant cause, but show no true compassion for the suffering of their black neighbors in Maycomb. Scout, dressed in an uncomfortable dress and instructed to behave like a young lady, listens with growing bewilderment and distaste. She sees Miss Maudie quietly rebuke Mrs. Merriweather when the criticism of Atticus becomes too direct. Miss Maudie minds them with pointed irony that it is Atticus who has carried the heavy moral burden for the town, while others sit in comfort and gossip. Aunt Alexandra, though often focused on social status, is visibly shaken by the weight placed on Atticus's shoulders and by the town's willingness to use him when convenient, but condemn him when he follows his conscience. She confides to Miss Maudie that the town is killing Atticus in a different way, draining him, expecting him to confront its worst problems, while they maintain their self-satisfaction. In the middle of the tea, Atticus comes home unexpectedly, looking exhausted. He pulls Alexandra, Miss Maudie, and Calpurnia into the kitchen and quietly reports Tom's death to them. The women are stricken. Alexandra is horrified that Bob Ewell's threats and lingering hatred might now be emboldened by Tom's death. After a few minutes, however, Alexandra and Miss Maudie return to the parlor, straighten their dresses, and resume serving their guests with measured grace. Scout watches in awe as they compose themselves and continue acting as hostesses despite their private grief. She realizes that this, in its own way, is a form of courage, the ability to absorb pain, maintain dignity, and not let the ugliness of the world completely derail one's responsibilities. The missionary tea scene, juxtaposed with the news of Tom's killing, drives home the novel's critique of performative morality and racial hypocrisy. Those who speak most loudly about Christian charity often fail to recognize or respond to the injustice in their own town. Meanwhile, Atticus and a few others, Calpurnia, Miss Maudie, Link Deese, quietly perform acts of true compassion and integrity at great personal cost. Scout, observing all this, continues to develop a more nuanced understanding of what it means to be good in a flawed society, and begins, begrudgingly, to practice the outward forms of ladylike composure without surrendering her growing moral clarity. In the weeks after Tom Robinson's death,
Life in Maycomb appears to return to normal on the surface, but underneath, tensions remain. The town's white residents largely absorb the event into their habitual racism, claiming Tom's attempt to escape proves his guilt or confirms stereotypes about black men. Scout recalls how Mr. Underwood, the newspaper editor, writes an editorial comparing Tom's killing to the senseless slaughter of songbirds, condemning the town for destroying an innocent man. Yet most people dismiss his words or twist them to fit their own prejudices. For Scout and Jem, the lesson is bitterly clear. The truth can be spoken, even printed, and still fail to alter entrenched injustice. Summer ends, and Jem begins to move definitively into adolescence. He becomes moodier, spends more time alone or reading, and lectures Scout about what she should and should not do. Scout resents his new authority, but also senses that his internal struggle over the trial has changed him. Boo Radley, though not seen, remains a quiet presence in their imaginations. Occasionally, Scout thinks of him when she passes the Radley house, but the children's earlier obsessive games have ended. They no longer treat Boo as an object of mockery or a ghost story. He has become a shadowy but human neighbor, associated with secret acts of kindness rather than terror. As autumn arrives, Maycomb prepares for a community Halloween celebration at the school, organized partly to prevent the kind of mischief that young people have caused in prior years. There will be a pageant, Maycomb County at Astra per Aspera, dramatizing the county's agricultural products and history. Scout is cast as a ham, representing the local pork industry. Her costume is a cumbersome wire and chicken wire frame covered in brown cloth with only small eye holes. It is heavy, awkward, and impossible to put on or remove quickly without help, but Scout is proud to be included and looks forward to the night. On Halloween evening, Atticus is too tired to attend, and Aunt Alexandra also stays home, suffering from a headache and from general worry about the family. Jem, now about 12, is tasked with escorting Scout to the pageant. The night is cool and dark as they walk down the road toward the school. The air, the emptiness of the street, and the rustling of leaves combine to create an eerie mood, but their conversation remains mundane. Jem teases Scout about her ham outfit. Scout complains about the tight wire and worries about remembering her single line. Their banter underscores how ordinary the evening feels to them, even as the reader, guided by Scout's older narrative voice, senses impending danger. At the school, children run around in costumes, games are played, and the pageant eventually begins. Scout, waiting backstage inside her ham costume, dozes off, missing her cue. When she wakes and rushes out, the scene is over, and the audience laughs. She is mortified. Mrs. Merriweather, directing the pageant, scolds Scout sharply, telling her she ruined the performance. Humiliated, Scout refuses to take off her costume afterwards, feeling safer within its protective shell. Jem, sympathetic, stays with her until most of the crowd has dispersed. Finally, the two of them set off home through the dark, Scout still encased in the giant ham.
The walk back is darker and quieter than the walk to school. The streetlights are few, and the trees create heavy shadows. Scout's costume makes it difficult for her to see clearly or move quickly. As they walk, Jem hears something behind them. Soft, deliberate footsteps, stopping when they stop, resuming when they move. At first, Scout assumes it is Cecil Jacobs, a classmate who earlier frightened them with a prank. Jem calls out, challenging Cecil to reveal himself, but no one answers. The tension grows. The footsteps draw closer. Suddenly, whoever is behind them breaks into a run. Jem yells for Scout to run, but her costume slows and disorients her. In the chaos that follows, Scout feels strong arms grabbing her, crushing the wire frame around her. She is thrown to the ground, the costume twisting around her body. She hears Jem fighting, grunting, and then a sickening crack, as if a bone has broken. There are scuffling sounds, breathing, cursing. Scout cannot see properly. Her world is reduced to sounds, pressure, and the suffocating enclosure of the ham. She feels hands fumbling at her costume, trying to reach her. Then a new pair of arms appears, rough but gentle, lifting her and carrying her toward the road. The sound of a man wheezing, then silence, suggests something violent has just ended. Terrified and confused, Scout is carried home by someone she cannot clearly see. Once inside the Finch house, Atticus and Dr. Reynolds, the family doctor, work to care for the injured children. Jem lies unconscious in his bed, his arm badly broken near the elbow. Dr. Reynolds assures Atticus the break can be set and Jem will recover, though he will carry a crooked arm for life. Scout, still in her mangled ham costume, is generally unharmed except for bruises and shock. Atticus, shaken, tries to understand what has happened. Sheriff Heck Tate soon arrives, reporting that there is a dead man under a tree near the road, Bob Ewell, killed by a knife thrust under his ribs. As the adults try to piece together the events, Scout notices a pale, thin man standing shyly in the corner of Jem's room, almost blending into the wallpaper. He is dressed in a too-tight, unmatched suit, with colorless hair and very pale eyes that avoid direct contact. Initially, Scout does not recognize him. Only when she studies his face and suddenly realizes who he must be, does she say in simple wonder, "Hey, Boo!" This is Arthur Boo Radley, the elusive neighbor who has haunted her childhood imagination. He is not monstrous, but fragile, intensely shy, and deeply uncomfortable in the spotlight of attention. He has carried Jem home and saved both children from Bob Ewell's attack. Downstairs, Atticus, Heck Tate, and Scout reconstruct the scene. Bob Ewell, intoxicated and full of long-nursed hatred, waited in the dark by the road, intending to ambush Jem and Scout as they returned from the pageant. His targets were defenseless children. Jem fought back, attempting to protect Scout, and in the struggle, his arm was broken. At some point, another man, Boo Radley, intervened, grappling with Ewell, and in the process killing him with Ewell's own kitchen knife. Sheriff Tate shows Atticus the knife and explains the physical evidence. Atticus initially believes that Jem, in defending himself and Scout, must have killed Ewell. He is prepared to accept the legal consequences, arguing that they should report it honestly and let a court decide. Atticus refuses to live by lies, even to protect his own son.
Sheriff Tate, however, insists that Jem did not kill Bob Ewell. He knows the truth from the tracks, the location of Jem's body when he fell, and other physical signs. A frail adult man, Boo Radley, struggled with Ewell and delivered the fatal blow. Tate firmly states that Bob Ewell fell on his own knife during the fight. He is not confused about what happened. He is choosing this version of events deliberately. He argues that dragging Boo Radley into public as a hero or defendant would be cruel. Boo has lived his entire adult life in seclusion, hiding from the town's scrutiny. To thrust him into the limelight, parade him through a trial or even a public commendation would be like killing a mockingbird, punishing an essentially innocent, gentle being who has harmed no one and quietly helped the children. Atticus, who abhors deception, struggles with this. He fears that Sheriff Tate is asking him to connive in a cover-up. He asks Scout's opinion, wanting to ensure she understands the moral stakes. Scout, after a moment of thought, agrees with Heck Tate. She says that forcing Boo into the public eye would be sort of like shooting a mockingbird, wouldn't it? With those words, she shows she has internalized Atticus's earlier lesson about mockingbirds. Beings who do nothing but create beauty or goodness should not be harmed. Boo, who placed gifts in the tree, mended Jem's pants, put a blanket on Scout's shoulders during the fire, and now saved their lives, is such a figure. The adults accept Tate's version. Bob Ewell fell on his knife.
The outward story will be that Ewell, drunk and violent, met his end through his own actions. Boo will be allowed to slip back into the Radley house, shielded from the town's curiosity. Before he does, Boo asks in a whisper if he can see Jim. Scout leads him upstairs. In Jim's room, Boo stands shyly by the bed, his face softened by concern. He gently strokes Jim's hair, a gesture of tender familiarity from a man who has watched these children grow up from behind curtains and windows. The scene is quiet and deeply moving. Scout realizes that Boo has always been there in the background of their lives, a guardian they neither saw nor understood. When Boo awkwardly asks Scout to escort him home, Scout, with new sensitivity, offers him her arm. She realizes that to an outside observer, it will look as though she is leading him, but in truth, she knows he is the one who has protected her. Walking him across the street to the Radley house becomes an act of mutual respect. On Boo's porch, after he disappears inside, Scout pauses and looks out at the neighborhood from his perspective. She imagines the years he has spent watching, Jem and Scout playing in the yard, running past his house, acting out dramas, discovering gifts in the tree. She envisions the seasons passing, their first day of school, the fire at Miss Maudie's, the summer games with Dill, all as Boo must have observed them silently. Standing there, she experiences a powerful moment of empathy, finally standing in Boo Radley's shoes and walking around in them, as Atticus had once urged her to do with others. She understands that Boo did not choose to be a fearsome recluse. He was made so by a harsh family and an unkind town, yet he retained enough goodness to care deeply for two children who had once mocked him.
Back home, Scout finds Atticus sitting by Jim's bed, reading. He has picked up a book, The Gray Ghost, which Atticus had previously promised to read to her. As Jem sleeps, Atticus reads aloud, and Scout, tired, listens. The story includes a character who was wrongly accused of wrongdoing, but is later revealed to be innocent and kind. When Atticus finishes, Scout, half asleep, comments that the story's people chased him and never could catch him because they didn't know what he looked like, and when they finally saw him, why he hadn't done any of those things. Atticus, he was real nice. Atticus responds, "Most people are, Scout, when you finally see them." This exchange connects the fictional Gray Ghost to Boo Radley and to Tom Robinson, figures misjudged and persecuted by a society too willing to believe the worst about those who are different or powerless. In the novel's final reflection, Scout, narrating as an adult, recognizes that much of what she and Jem experienced were her first steps into a morally complex world. She has seen ugly truths, racism, mob mentality, the failure of legal institutions, and the cruelty of gossip. Yet, she has also seen courage and kindness in unexpected places, in Atticus's principled defense of Tom, in Calpurnia's loyalty and bridge building between communities, in Miss Maudie's honesty and quiet support, in Heck Tate's decision to protect Boo from public harm, and in Boo Radley's hidden, steadfast care. Scout's journey from a child who feared Boo as a monster to one who understands him as a gentle, wounded neighbor encapsulates Harper Lee's central message. Genuine understanding requires empathy, the willingness to see others as individuals with their own pain and dignity, beyond the simplifying myths of race, class, and rumor. The story closes with a sense of guarded hope. Jem, though physically scarred and emotionally altered, will grow into a man carrying the lessons of Atticus and the memory of Tom Robinson's unjust fate. Scout, having learned to stand in others' shoes, possesses a moral awareness that may help her navigate and perhaps challenge the injustices of Maycomb. Atticus, weary but unbroken, remains the moral anchor, walking into Jem's room at the end of the book, turning off the light, and staying beside his son as he sleeps.
In this simple act of parental vigil, the novel suggests that amid pervasive injustice, the quiet, persistent practice of empathy and integrity within one's own family and community is both fragile and profoundly powerful. A way of refusing to surrender to the darkness, even when one is licked before you begin.